Okay. Yeah, no, the way of approaching the exam is really to look at the past papers, and you'll see that there's a kind of a form that you'll see in the questions, and the questions tend to be fairly general, but they're focused on the particular module. So we've got a module on, interest rate theory, and we've got a module on forecasting, and all of those. And you'll see those kind of reflected in the questions, and they don't. It's not as though there's sort of a great deal of scope that I have writing the exam to sort of change it. What you will notice, though, is that there's one question that will be compulsory, and that has a higher weighting, and they sort of change year to year. Sometimes they don't. So there might be 2 years running when we might ask a question about forecasting, but then forecasting may not be asked for another 5 years as a compulsory. But there will be just about always a question on forecasting, or a particular topic somewhere in the rest. So the same set of questions are there either as compulsory or optional, and they cover all of the unit. And so there's basically none of the units left out, and it'll be there either as compulsory or optional. The other side of it is that the paper has a section, usually 10 marks, for mathematical calculations, and that 10 marks worth of questions usually comes from the DCF exercise. And the idea of that is that it's an opportunity to show that you have been sort of switched on when you've been writing your DCF models, and you understand the way that different things happening, the discounting, the price escalation, capital gains tax, all those different bits and pieces that sort of make up the DCF model. In theory, the mathematical questions can also include the other models and things that we've done, say like the development stuff. In practice, there are some parts of the the Turner model that I avoid asking in the exam, simply because they're pretty sort of complicated one-off sort of things, and you're probably not going to need to memorize them, although it's good to understand how it all fits together. So it's important for you to understand how the Turner model works. And if you find yourself studying property development, do you do property development, Roel? Is that one of the units you might be doing in the future?
No, I'm not planning to do property development.
Oh, fair enough. Okay. Yeah, in this unit, we look at the financial side of property development. There's another unit that we have, if you're a glutton for punishment. No. If you're interested in development, there's a unit completely on that, and it takes the mathematical side of it a long way further. Development's a very, very interesting kind of area of the property industry. But anyway, the Turner model in development actually gives you probably the best value for money in terms of understanding the development kind of world is what we cover in the finance side, as well as the Turner model is fairly simple. Actual property developers will be using far more complicated models, but they'll basically do the same thing. So in the Turner model, you've got a simplified version of what a real developer would be doing. But if you were to use the Turner model that you do in the unit on any development, whether it's subdividing a battle axe block or something, or building a new suburb, the Turner model has all of the right parts in it, and it's quite precise, so it can be used for that. But anyway, that's the major other bit of modelling that we've got. Anyway, somewhere in amongst all of that, there'll be 10 marks worth of mathematics, and that's pretty much the exam. So as long as you're moderately familiar with the whole of the unit, then the exam shouldn't come as a surprise. I will be opening the exam to be available for you for a lot longer than the couple of hours it'll take for you to complete it. The exam will be written using the same format as when it was done as a formal sit down in an exam room kind of exam. So when it's done as a sit down in an exam room exam, it takes 2 hours to do. And so at least theoretically, you should be able to complete the exam in 2 hours. 2 hours and 10 minutes if you want to add a bit for reading, and maybe 2.5 hours if you're really slow typing. You know, it's in that kind of area. However, it's going to be open for, and I don't have the hours in front of me, but it's going to be open like something like about 12 or 15 hours or something. So you'll have ample time. Now, I hope people don't sort of fuss and fret and sort of think, oh, in that case, it's going to be open for 10 hours, therefore I'll spend 10 hours on it and just basically destroy your day. I don't think people will probably do very much better if they take that approach, but they're welcome to. I'm not going to time it. I'm not going to mark anyone wrong because they spent 5 hours rather than 2 hours. Doesn't matter. I'm simply going to be looking at what comes in to be marked. I'd prefer things to be written in a succinct way. And so I'd prefer, I don't know, page or two of good material rather than 5 pages of waffle. And to that extent, I also encourage people to think about writing out their ideas as bullet points if they think that's appropriate. Some places it is. And so don't feel shy about writing it in a more compact form. As say bullet points, for instance, you know, if there are 5 things you've got to be aware of for X, then just write boom, 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 you know, just write them out. You don't have to sort of pad it out. There will be well, how do I put this? Reference to wider reading will be positively viewed. And so if you've read further than simply the materials that are directly in the course, then that will be seen as evidence that, you know, you've got a wider handle on the unit material and you've got a wider interest. So by all means, name drop the sources you've used. Doesn't mean you need to have comprehensive citations the way if you were writing an assignment. We're not writing an assignment here, we're writing an exam paper. However, if you want to make some reference to something that you found in the Housing Industry Association newsletter or something that you found online when you were taking an interest in such and such forecasting or something, then that'll be tremendous. And like all units, if you're going for a distinction, high distinction, then we're expecting people to really do 2 things. One is to have evidence of wider reading, which shows wider interest. And the other is to show evidence that you've got a superior understanding than simply the nuts and bolts that are presented in the unit. So the unit is meant to give you the basics for the topics that we cover. In this case, it's property investment and finance. So after you come out of this unit, I would like to think that anyone who has passed the unit is then competent to be able to give reliable financial investment advice on property investments. Now, we're focused on residential. The reason for that is it's approachable at this level, but the tools that you've learned will apply to anything from valuing a granny flat you're thinking of building in the backyard to a suburb or, you know, a Westville shopping complex. It's just that, you know, it's just more complicated. And I want you guys to be able to go out into industry confident that you know what you're doing, and industry to be able to see that they're employing somebody who is reliable and valuable. And that's very much the way I pitch it. A couple of the topics that we've covered here to do with property theory and with finance theory, say interest rate theory, forecasting, and the bit on the recent history, like the last couple of generations of financial history in Australia. They're topics that you won't necessarily find in a lot of textbooks. And the reason is that they are things which I think are very practical and very specific for the Australian context in our part of history. I'm not sure how transportable they are, say, if you want to go and live in England, where circumstances are a little bit different and their history is a little bit different, maybe in the United States, similar. Although I do know that the Anglo world, United States, Britain, Canada, other English-speaking worlds, New Zealand, have had more or less the same kind of experiences over the same kind of time frame. So what we've looked at in terms of, say, history and labour force participation trends and its effect on real estate and so on, as far as I'm aware, those things have also had impacts on those other Anglo countries. I think that probably had an effect on Europe. I'm not quite sure of how they've affected other parts of the world, say India, China. Well, China is quite a complex kind of case in itself, Africa. So it's not entirely transportable globally, but you can certainly take it a long way further than, you know, the shores of Australia. So that's ultimately what the unit is about, and my purpose in teaching it the way that it's taught. I want you guys to be able to go out and impress either clients or bosses with your grasp of these things, and I'd expect that people who have got credit and above in the unit will be able to do that, and they'll be quite valuable. People who are passing are going to be competent, and I hope everyone passes. I think with the online format for the exam, you've got a superior opportunity to not fail. And to a certain extent, as far as I can make out, the only reason you'd fail this unit is because life got in the way and you didn't spend enough time on it. I think certainly because everyone who does it has already proved themselves by doing the introductory courses in accounting, economics, property, and so on. So you guys have proven that you know what you're doing. And so this one should just sort of roll off. It does give the opportunity to look behind the curtain a bit, certainly in terms of what we're covering with forecasting. While we go over the standard approaches to forecasting, we also, I think, raise some of the more controversial and critical issues about forecasting. You know, the way that most of the tools assume that the future is going to be like the past. And I hope I've succeeded in convincing you that that's the one thing we don't know. We can assume the future is going to be like the past, but I mean, this year, I think it's just a classic example. No one, well, maybe Bill Gates kind of knew that COVID was coming, but, you know, the average man and his dog in the street in Sydney had no idea that we're all going to be sort of locked down. And the poor old Victorians, I mean, if I was living in Melbourne in February and I knew what was going to happen there in terms of their martial law and stuff, I'd be getting a ticket out of there as soon as possible. I really feel for my Victorian brethren. Anyway, so I mean, these are sort of places where forecasting is really shown to be very contingent. You know, it is only a guess. It's an educated guess, but it's also pivotally important when it comes to investment decisions. And while we're looking at property, and you can sort of see it more evidently with real estate, you know, you can see people not being able to pay their rent, and you can see businesses going bust, and so shops becoming vacant. You know, that's really visible. Not quite so obvious when it's businesses collapsing, because it's not quite so evident to everyone apart from the business owner. I guess when companies, publicly listed companies, go under, again, it tends to be more in terms of a fall in the share price rather than an absolute spectacular effect. But what we're seeing now is a lot of that sort of stuff happening. Okay, that's pretty much as I can tell you without having specific questions about the exam. I do hope that you feel confident going into it. I don't think anyone needs to be sort of uncomfortable about their chances of passing, so long as they've gone through the unit, so as long as they've given it a little bit of time. I mean, obviously, you can't study by not studying, and there's a lot of material in the unit which is, I suspect, new for a lot of people. And so, watching the videos, reading the resources, I hope it's enjoyable experience to work through, and it does give people something interesting to exercise their minds. But beyond that, you just have to do it. Anyway, any other questions, Ron?
Yes, like when you're doing like the calculations on the exam paper, and you need your Excel to support the answer. So I assume you have to take that Excel file that has the supporting calculations and just embed it into that exam paper as an Excel icon.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for that. That's a very good question. And you'll probably end up with what you might consider to be a very unexpected answer. I'm going to give the answer that your boss or your client would give you. What do you think that might be? Imagine you're out there giving a bit of financial investment advice on property. You find yourself with a client who's going to give you $5,000 or $10,000 to do an analysis on some property investment you're considering. How interested is your client going to be with your working?
Well, I think the client might be interested in all the calculations.
Okay. Now, why do you think they're interested in your calculations?
Well, because all the data that is given will have an impact on the investment, like what returns are going to get from their investment property.
Yep. But you know what your client is really going to be interested in? What is the client really interested in? You don't know?
No, I don't know.
Okay. I would say that if I spent $5,000 or $10,000 getting someone to give an investment advice on something, I would be wanting, my focus really is whether they could convince me that it was a good or a bad investment. And I'd be willing to spend hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of dollars on the yes or no that comes at the bottom of that bit of advice. True?
Yeah, it's true.
Okay. Now, if someone spends 2 pages or 200 pages getting to the yes or no, yeah, that's fine. Maybe with 200 pages, I think, yes, they've done a lot of work. I can be more confident of the yes or no. But it's the yes or no, which is really the only thing I'm interested in. True?
Okay.
Yep.
That's true.
Yep. Okay. And behind that, the yes or no is the, when we're doing DCF, for instance, the yes or no is the accuracy of that final number. Is the NPV positive? Is the IRR over the
Yes.
hurdle rate, right? Now, what that means is that if I go off and do my consulting work and I do absolutely magnificent work, but I get the wrong answer, you know, I put the minus sign in the wrong place on row 37 on page 452, right?
Yeah.
And I get the wrong answer. And I say, yes, go ahead, buy that property. Right? Do you think my client is going to be interested or excited or pleased?
No, I don't think it's going to be pleased, because they might result in a negative NPV and IRR just because you put the minus in the wrong place. So it will make you think that it's a bad investment.
That's right. And if the investor goes out and spends the $10 million buying the office tower or shopping centre or something, and they go broke over it because of the minus sign that you missed out on page 37, they're going to have you hide in court, aren't they?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, this is a really important thing. Now, you know that as an accountant probably better than most people in the community. I would say that accountants and land surveyors are the two professions that you find in the community that are absolutely preoccupied with getting the right answer. To a certain extent, it doesn't matter how you get it. But if you do someone's books and do their tax return from them, and again, you get the minus sign wrong, and you think the the tax man should be giving them a refund of, I don't know, $40,000, and in fact they should be paying $100,000 more in tax. Okay, as an accountant, not good. You might end up losing your CPA or something. As an accountant, you know that you've got to get the right answer. Your client isn't really interested in the way you do it. They assume that you do it the right way and the professional way, and follow all the standards of your profession. But they really couldn't give a hoot. They don't understand it anyway. Right? So that's very, very important. And when you're working in the area, I see it especially in accounting, but I think in the financial advisory area, more people should be aware of this, that it's getting the right answer, which is what the community not just prefers, but demands. And it's sort of a sad kind of fact. I mean, we're used to school where, you show your work and you probably get, 80% of the marks. And that's kind of good at school. But when you get into the professional world, and especially when you're giving advice to people that have to do with, their futures, then it's getting the right answer, which is really, really important. Now, I'm stressing this, two reasons. One is it's a really important lesson for you to learn at some point and to give a lot of thought to it. The other one is when we get to the exam, only going to be 10 marks on numbers.
Yeah, 10 marks.
The marking criteria is going to be whether it's right or wrong. I don't care whether you use Excel or a financial calculator or an abacus or count the fingers on your, hands and toes. I don't care how you get it. I assume that you'll be using the right kind of mathematics, but it's getting the right answer, which is going to get you the marks. We're not going to be interested in the working.
Well, I think the working proves that you get the right answer. Oh
no, the answer proves that you get the right answer.
Yeah, but
there's probably half a different
how.
Yeah, but there's a half a dozen different ways of getting, 2 squared. But the fact that you come up with 4 means that you've done it correctly, right?
Yeah, I've done it correctly.
Yeah. So that's just something to watch in the exam. Now, I think in the exam, I have to check this. The inputs for the numerical answers is going to be different to the inputs for the text. And so the text answers, the short essays, is going to be via submitting a file, one Word file. Actually, it's basically you just write the answers into the exam paper and then upload the exam paper with your name on it. For the numerical questions, there's actually going to be what looks like a survey type of input. And so I'll be giving you a URL. You open the link, the URL link, and it'll simply ask you for the numbers for answering those questions. And you just basically you just put in the numbers. Now, one thing to watch out for, when you put the numbers in, you don't have to say whether they're dollars or yen or bags of gold. So you don't have to put dollar signs in. You also don't have to put commas or percentage, or with the percentage, you can put percentage sign or what have you. I prefer if there are any answers that have, are expressed in percent, that you express them in terms of their equivalent decimal. So 1% is 0.01 as a decimal. 13.7% is 0.137. And so you enter it that way. And if you end up with a question, I don't think there are any, but if there are any other units, say, how many years does it take for such and such to happen? Some investment to mature. You just simply put in the number. Don't put in, 12.5 years. You just put 12.5. You don't put 12.5 YEARS because the exam will be marked. The numbers part of the exam will be marked automatically, and it won't accept words and commas and whatnot. But that'll all be in the input system. The input system will be saying, don't put commas in or don't write the word years, that sort of stuff. Sound easy?
Yeah.
Terrific. Okay. Fair enough. I think that's probably about as much as I can say. If you any other questions, I think there's a good question about entering the numerical questions, because that is something that a lot of people will be thinking about. It gives you the flexibility, by the way. I mean, if you've got a HP 41C or an Excel spreadsheet, or, as I say, you're pretty sharp on an abacus, I'm not saying how you calculate it. And that gives you a bit of flexibility. Because a lot of people, you see, let's imagine you've got a financial calculator or your Excel and you're pretty sharp at using it. And you basically type in your answer with your financial calculator. Then you feel that, well, I've got to tell sort of small how I work that out. And then you sit down and sort of type out maybe 3 lines of expressions and equations and whatnot. It takes you a lot of time. I'm not really that interested in reading it. It takes you time to write it out, so it wastes everyone's time. And I'm expecting by this stage, part of the puzzle with this stuff, especially since you're getting a lot of time on it, is that you will know the correct way of solving the puzzle. So you don't need to tell me how you're doing it, because the fact that you get the right answer tells me that you've done it. The other thing, like the assignment, every student will be basically work on their own data set. So the numerical questions, you'll put in your student number. Your student number will produce for you your own unique data set, and then you'll write your answers in. Your answers are unique to you. We do that because, while most of the people in the class wouldn't consider cheating, for something like this, where everyone's got the thing at home, I mean, it'd be easy for half a dozen people to just get their heads together, and you answer question 1A and I'll answer question 1B, and then we sort of swap them all at the end. And that wouldn't be exactly fair to the honest students in the class. So without wanting to disadvantage you because you're an honest man compared to somebody else who's not, everyone has their own data set. Really important that you enter your student number, because if you get your student number entry wrong, what's that going to do to your exam answers, So take care there. One of the things I noticed, I was actually quite surprised going through the assignments. We do similar things for, the test data set. A couple of cases where people put their student number in wrong. And I thought, whoa, that's a bit silly. For the assignment, I sort of went back, reverse engineered what was going on and all the rest of it. I mean, it takes an absolute age to go and do, but in theory, students who can't even get their student number right really shouldn't get any marks, but we gave it to them. In the exam, I can't guarantee that level of charity. So when you put your student number in, make sure that you do get it correctly. I will be going to a little bit of trouble to make it easy for people to check that it's right. But one of the things that I found is that people seem to be extraordinarily creative in finding out new and unexpected ways of messing things up. So the easiest way to do it is simply to put your student number in right, have a bit of a check over it yourself to make sure that it's right, and away you go. Should be pretty straightforward. Good. Any other questions?
No, I don't have any. No.
Okay, mate. We might finish there. I think that probably gives people a pretty good summary of what to expect, and that way I'm not sort of taking your time unnecessarily. Thank you very much for coming on board. It's really been useful, and if you hadn't mentioned a couple of those things, I may not have got round to sort of talking about them. So I really do appreciate your input. So thanks very much for that.
Yeah, thank you. So I assume all the questions are going to cover the topics throughout this unit.
Yeah, it's going to cover the whole unit.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, the first, 4 weeks or something was all just numbers working towards DCF. So there's not a lot of theoretical interest in that. And that'll be largely covered in the numerical questions. So there's a focus on the latter part of the course, where we're doing the more, shall we say, theory-oriented, history-oriented, all those other kind of things. That's where you're going to find more of the questions. And if you go over the last, the past papers that are up online for you, you'll get an idea. I think it sort of pretty much covers the gambit. But if you notice in the last 3 years that some topic hasn't been covered, I don't know if financial history of the last 60 years, you don't see a question in there in the last 3 years, and you say, oh, but we actually did that unit. Well, maybe that's a good reason to think maybe it might be on this coming paper. I don't know. But it is the whole unit. Good on you.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we might finish up. You have a good day, and I wish you well for preparing for the exam, and I hope you have enjoyed the unit. I think it's one of those units that is going to be useful for most people, both in their private lives as well as in their professional lives, because whether it's buying an investment property for yourself and your family, or whether it's just buying your family home, understanding property investment is a really useful skill to have. Okay, mate. Thank you very much, and all the best for the exam. See you.
Great. Thank you. Bye.